There was once a blank page, but having nothing on it, it wasn't aware of what it was. Then it got something on it. And although it was no longer exactly what it was originally, it then at least became conscious of its existence, whatever it was. It now wants to attain again some state of blankness and become God knows what. One kid's father told him, "Don't let the weather fool you." And his mother told him, "Don't let sex fool you." And his uncle told him, "Don't let the lights of the big city fool you." His rabbi told him, "Don't let adversarial arguments fool you." And his fool told him that he should always listen and learn from others, except in those instances where he obviously shouldn't. On one world, they believed that there were 3 spiritually illuminating drugs: hashish, charitable works, and jalapeno peppers late at night. All in all, concluded Professor Dunkirk, it should be becoming quite clear that there is much, much more to the workings of the human mind than most minds ever realize. Yes, indeed, thought he as he puffed on his pipe, much, much more, and sometimes less. Puff, puff. A viewer writes, "I don't understand why you pick on the mind so much. I kind of like mine. Is this indicative of something in particular?" "Possibly, sir." Puff, puff. "Quite possibly." A man asked a mystic, "Of all the many descriptions of the experience of the secret, awakening, enlightenment, liberation, illumination, regeneration, and transformation, which would you say is the most accurate?" And the mystic replied, "Liberation," but did not elaborate. Though not fully perceived by zoology, psychology, theology, or astrologers, the principal way by which to identify a rabbit is by its rabbit-like thought patterns. And some kids in our audience wrote in reminding us that we should not try that here at the station. People with ordinary, rational, and sequential minds, when they hear something out in life described, will, almost without fail, look out there to try and figure out what it's all about. Life doesn't take instructions in hiding things. Life gives them. Like in having rabbits think mostly rabbit-like thoughts. Weep 'em and read. As soon as he awoke each morning, the very first thing one man would say to himself was, "Time is running out." To which he'd then reply, "What do you mean, is?" Which seemed to give him some sort of either an electrical jump start or a short circuit. Though, knowing him, he'd take either. And a viewer writes, "I do not appreciate hearing it said that one person knows another person. It makes me nervous. Yours for a more robust economy," etc. In a certain kingdom, the royal priest kept in his book of Holy Scriptures pictures of naked women, whilst the people secreted within their printed erotica excerpts of sacred texts. And one day the priest offered up the idea of, "Why don't we switch places?" But the people objected on the basis that there was more of him than there was of them. And he countered by pointing out that they had it backwards, to which they replied, "See, that's just what we were talking about." Geographical update. To the alert, there are no kingdoms of interest outside their own mind. One of the things about finally and clearly realizing what it is you're up against is that it focuses any hostility you feel to a single target. There was once a flock of sheep who found themselves captive within some fenced-in location. And in spite of how passionately some wanted to escape, they were never able to do so because they kept attacking specific areas of the fence whose inherent ability to flex and accommodate itself to each assault made actual breakthrough impossible. But by the fact of the fence being able to give when pushed, it created the illusion with the sheep that they could make gradual, step-by-step progress in their search for freedom. First here, then there. Which, moreover, served to keep them sufficiently distracted so that they never got around to surveying the full scope and nature of the fence as a whole, which, suggesteth I, by the story, might have revealed a totally new picture of precisely where they were and exactly what it really was holding them there. And now a neurological update. One man had a motto: feed an opening, starve a closing. Now back to the funny cars Grand National. There was once an extremely weird location, a city actually, where those who lived in basements and lower floors of apartment buildings didn't care much one way or the other about the everyday things that happened to them, while those who lived higher up thought and talked about such incessantly. There was once a place where some extremely weird individuals decided that when it came to where they stayed at, they didn't want to stay upstairs and they didn't want to stay downstairs. And truth is, for the longest spell, they weren't quite sure where it was they wanted to stay at. But hey, not to be concerned about them, because sooner or later, everybody's got to stay somewhere. Now some sports news. One man began to wonder if it really matters where you are as long as you don't think about where you are. Such a man, 14, routine residence, 0. Life speaks literally, but via thought men hear figuratively. The few begin to do so metaphorically, just in time if they succeed to hear life literally. Wait in the car. One man named his dog, "What does it matter?" And his cat, "Why does the pooch's name disturb me?" One man had, instead of a right and left side to his brain, 2 other things. In response to which his liver noted, "What do I care?" One man had, instead of real functioning physical organs, imaginary ones. Some men, strike that, all men have more things and talents than they recognize. Bow wow, meow, and other such amenities. Now some financial news. You can always spot ordinary reasonable men. They always believe they're sick or coming down with something soon. The title of this item is Some Things the Mind Has Particular Trouble Remembering, such as Everything It Thinks About. That was the title. Explanations of things, no matter how useful, informative, and intriguing, are still explanations of things, not the things themselves. Some things sure are hard to remember. A man once thought to himself, "I wonder what the enlightenment can be other than obvious." Guess I'll have to wait and see. And one man asked that we not use his real name. He says he now tries not to. Some graffiti on a monastery wall declared, "Though 'tis hell to be held captive, 'tis doubly so not to know by whom." Obviously put there by a junior monk. One man said, "I look upon the life that's been given to me as a field to be plowed." And once again did life see that it had given of itself to the right kind of man. According to some unpublished cosmic labor statistics, there were no such people as loafers, coasters, slackers, and ne'er-do-well out-of-workers until mystics came along. As regards the secret, there's no profit in studying those who themselves are studying the matter. A viewer writes, will you repeat the one where you said that all of a man's ordinary thoughts are fungible and individually relevant? Consider it did. One man could talk about anything for an hour or more. But, shucks and hell, says he, that's nothing. My mind can do it indefinitely. One man, after considering my allegory of a mystical version of the Orient Express running from mundane Paris to the enlightened Istanbul, says it's a good thing I didn't use London as a starting point, or else we'd all be stumbling around forever in a fog.
No.
Ha ha, laughs he, thinking he had made a joke. Mortally conceived of undertakings which do not appear to be working, but which remain in widespread operation, actually are, but at a level not originally projected. Simple version. All that discernibly is working, whether discernible or not to routine sight. Current events update. There are no such things as current events outside a man's own mind. There was once a race of men who believed that if you died, same as you were born, that you went to a place of super glue, as opposed to the kind you obviously lived in.
No.
A lion and an elephant were laying back in the grass, resting, and the lion stretched and said, why do you reckon it is that humans think of there being some condition after death that's even more miserable than their lives? And the elephant leaned his head over, spat, and replied, you figure it has anything to do with the fact that they do think? And just then, Life told them to stand up and get back on the job that a group of tourists with cameras were coming their way. When it comes to an expanded state of mental awareness, everybody can talk about it. Pity they don't get a hint therefrom. Save your damnable pity, writes the viewer. You're just trying to trick me again. Yours for safer rafting, etc. On one world were once some creatures who had a certain organ made of elastic. And one of its abilities and apparent purposes was to give the sensation that it could turn inside out and sometimes swallow its own self. Thank God for dear old Mother Earth, what? A speaker addressed a crowd. Only the small and simple need be exact in what they say. And all attendants silently pondered this for a bit. Then someone said, you surely can't mean that. And the speaker replied, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. As far as the secret goes, one guy thought to himself, well, at least as long as I don't know what it is, I can't be disappointed in it. One man says his philosophy of life is, you can act silly, but keep a good heart and a clear mind. Yes, he adds, he doesn't see the significance of it either, but hey, it's just a philosophy. One guy had a motto, feed instability, starve its antipodal. The lame and pregnant mystic's at-home self-administered test to determine the presence of a lack of progress. That's the title. Here's the test. You're still thinking about it. One man only felt serious about things when he was sick. And he only felt sick when he thought. He says this may all lead somewhere, but he's not sure where. Now a travel tip. Never ask your mind for directions. And a viewer writes, once again, I must insist that you cannot possibly mean this literally. I mean, sir, I must vigorously insist that you cannot. Yours for an increase in quality entertainment, etc. Mused one man, it's not the human voice per se that's near unbearable, but it when talking about things it doesn't comprehend. In response to another viewer's earlier comments, we received this from our television audience. I'm not so sure that in your comments that you are picking on the mind itself as much as you are on its normal mode of operation and its apparent general lack of interest in any additional potentials it may harbor. And trailing right behind that one, in came this fax. Dear sir, I at one time was a statistician and would be most interested to know what the ratio is between those who talk and think about an expanded state of mental awareness and those who actually experience it. And just after that, we received a phone call here at the studios informing us that we qualified to receive a 50% discount on the purchase of a fully adjustable electronic bed. Only those of imagined extreme deformities fail to realize that in this life, everything fits. A recently discovered myth tells of a land wherein time disappeared, and all of the creatures who could think about preferences lost theirs. Thank God for the good old here and now. Eh, what? A man once asked a mystic, is it hard to be humble when you're enlightened and know the secret? Is it not still surprising on how many planets in the solar system they still confuse humility with stupidity? One man wonders why earthlings pick the word dumb to mean unable to speak when he thinks the definition better suits some antonym to the word. Then there's this other man who questions whether living the life of a recluse is simply for the purpose of not being able to hear other people talk. But then his brother wonders if it's so you can't talk to other people. And their cousin, who came for a visit, brought with him a valise crammed full of silence and sham humility, which they proceeded to eat up completely on his very first night there. Shall we all now turn to page 32 in our hymnals and sing, the secret's not hid, it's only a foolin'. I guess the heart of that will probably be limited only to our mystical bluegrass lovers. There was once an explorer who discovered that it was cold at one end of the planet, hot in the middle, and then cold again at the other end. He plotted this out on a chart of his world, studied it for a while, then suddenly concluded, I am a real explorer. What do I care about the planet? And immediately laid out his findings on a chart of his mind. For one who knows to try and describe the secret, they must speak either metaphorically or else as plainly as possible. But neither telling alone is sufficient. One of the things any chance of liberation requires is a realization that life is not a situation, and only man's mind sees it as such. And finally, there was once a world that was beset by a multitude of storms, but it undertook the quest, became enlightened, and now is beset by but one. Life is not a situation. Continuing our series of me dragging out easily seen, already observed phenomenon in life, wherein life is giving very broad hints about the secret itself right out in front of everybody, and reminding you that if you try and analyze it in any way, if you try and look for motivations of the people involved, if you think there's something other than what's going on, I am wasting, the whole effort, because you already do that, and that is how life keeps it hid. Tonight, let's see, we already covered, since I started this, the worlds of sex, government, celeb, fame, sports then. When interviewed, coaches of teams, even when they just lost, will say that they certainly benefited, that they gained from the experience. Even those of people here in the studio, after doing this 4 or 5 nights, I still see people sort of leaning, waiting for the rest of it. Anybody that leans and waits for the rest of it, you've already stepped all over my opening caveat, because you think there's more to what's going on than what's going on. Woo! Well, of course, if it wasn't, the whole world of fiction writing and most of nonfiction would be out of business. We were continuing. I will continue our inquiry into the question, is all talk metaphorical? Or in an alternative, and if it is, what is life thereby trying or offering to tell man? I was using as an example last time the fact that there is much inquiry, always has been, regarding publicly available materials that professes to be about the quest, about the search for the secret, about the experience of the secret, the enlightenment, etc. And there's probably, for you statisticians, as much written, if not more, about the people who apparently are involved with the search for it and the study of it, as there is materials purporting to be actually about the experience. Specifically, if you recall, I periodically in these little news items I make up, or in some other reason, I may make reference to some apparent historical figure, some accepted historical figure. Also, from last time, I don't think it went much of anywhere in most people's perception, but there was a news item that pointed out that one of the purposes of having historical figures is so that man can better have history. I know the mind normally thinks that there's this history, and then there seems to be all these notable, memorable historical figures. That's what a historical figure means. It doesn't mean everybody that's ever lived. That's not what it means, because everybody was a historical figure if you've already lived. But you understand, everybody knows the connotation. A historical figure means one worthy of note, memorable, someone who had an impact on life. And so it would apparently be that history, for instance, is a thing. And may I point out to you, as the item attempted to, this has really nothing to do with history other than metaphorically. We're talking about something much more specific, a much smaller target, a much smaller target than history. And by the way, I must say that it's much closer to most people than history. That would seem as though, allow me to make a gesture, that history, see, is like, well, sometimes they help. That history is like this sweeping vista. That history is like this thing out there. It's like this background upon which stands figures. That is, history is there, and then there are these memorable figures standing there. So you would think, well, history is already there. And then you can find areas, if that's history, areas in here you start looking at certain areas, a certain day or a few years. If you study, let's say, Western history, you can find, unless it is a book that is really stressed out trying to fill many pages, they're trying to sell it by the pound, that there are areas, months, sometimes years, that apparently no memorable figures happened. They used to, it was kind of the dumping grounds, they used the idea of the Dark Ages. For a long time you couldn't find in Western literature, for instance, much writing going on, from about, 360, 350 AD, up until the 1200s. It was like just, they'd already had people writing. You had all kinds of considered historical, primo historical intellectual figures of Plato's and Socrates, St. Augustine, and it was like everybody forgot how to write, forgot how to think, nobody had a thought where they're writing down. At any rate, that apparently you have the background, the setup, the set, the backlot, the milieu of history, and then periodically here you have these figures, these giants, these historical figures. So the thing is that apparently here's history, and then it simply makes possible the fact of us being able to remember historical figures or notable figures. That here it already is, and just periodically the figures appear. The figures appear so that they can be history. Anyone who, I say this sarcastically in a very friendly sense, anyone who gets no grasp of that whatsoever, at least if not now, sometime in your life, will never be any closer to the secret of life than you are now. Because there it is. And your mind, I know, wants to play a viewer. Most of you who've got a sane, rational mind, you want to play your own viewer and say, you can't mean that literally. Historical figures don't exist so that we can have history. If you say so. You know best. Back to these historical figures, and back to, if you recall, and I'm speaking about people in the world of metaphor, but all of you remember that I am even beyond that. I'm speaking about the world of metaphor and what it might mean and people's interest in it, but I'm speaking about the world of metaphor symbolically. I don't even mean this. Now we're getting somewhere, right? Now if your mind was a viewer, even if you were ambidextrous, it would want to take a pen in each hand and say, wait a minute. A double-barreled complaint. I know. The thing about human speech and metaphor and men trying to, throughout history, trying to describe, apparently, how to go about the secret, how to go about the quest, whichever one you like, how to seek enlightenment. And then some literature, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Sometimes one man will do both, or one person. But literature about what apparently is the search, the struggle to achieve it, and then some written about it. And sometimes they are all in the same. They're in the same series or piece of literature. And I was using it as an example since people even ask themselves, they ask each other, they write books speculating on it. It's not limited to what I used as a jumping off place last time of people inquiring of me, since I sometimes make reference to supposed historic figures in some writing. But where we sort of left off in this particular area last time was, and I'm not bringing this up right now just to refresh your memory, it's because I know that it did not have the full effect on everyone last time, but it's still, I'm going to repeat it for apparently the reason just to refresh your memory and bring us up to speed, which is, as always, just an out-and-out facade, but it's a friendly facade. The most obvious being throughout the world, and especially the West, the writings. In fact, with no exceptions worth mentioning, they're publicly known. Anything that is accepted to be, anything that purports to be, anything that is analyzed to be about the world of mysticism will always be on a spiritual basis, will be replete with references to God. And I was using, if you recall what I was holding up and then trying to twist a bit, but I want to tell you that it's still, I can assure you all of you didn't see it all, and I'll take some of the responsibility and try to do a bit more, but there's a limit to it. That if you take any idea, you pick up one that is apparently the diary, the working diary, a kind of reflective autobiography of some monk, some nun, someone living the life of contemplation and seclusion. And they go on and on about God. They go on and on about prayer. And you can, if you have some wee bit expanded, superior understanding of what this is all about, some wider notion of what life is, sans your own opinions and preferences, you can, in other words, you're some step on the path of the mystical, let's say, of some transcendental knowledge. You're somewhere further than everyone else, no matter how far, you're a step ahead. You can certainly read that, and without any doubt find therein all of these ideas about how often you should pray and how you should live alone. Probably live under some kind of conditions of at least slight depravity. In a cold room, rough clothing, hard bed. But notice throughout the world, east and west, to live the life of that kind of mystic, it always entails living in seclusion. You may be with another group of monks or nuns together, but you have cut yourself off from the world in some kind of walled conditions, hidden conditions somewhere. And you more or less cut yourself off from each other. Right? But you secrete yourself from life, secret yourself from life. You engage in some form of continual worship. Prayer is what it amounts to. And you're continually calling for the help of somebody, of God, of Jesus, of Jehovah, of Allah, of Muhammad himself, of the intervention of saints, of spirits, or of some guru, some priest or prophet in that particular religion, in that particular mystical tradition. And you can read that and at first dismiss it. You can just glance through it, and of course within certain bounds you're within your rights if you're not that great of a reader and that great of a need. Anytime you open up anything and you see the big G word, God, you can go ahead and lay it down. Now, once you understand, I don't mean that there's not something you could use, but insofar as thinking, well, somebody's about to tell me the secret, they don't know the secret. They may have a step ahead also on the mystical path, but that one step that, let us say, figuratively speaking, I will credit to their account, that is about it. Because once they start publicly speaking about God without them understanding it, that is their own consciousnesses, their own understandings, admission that this is about it, folks. But, you know, they don't like the sound of that. It's certainly not going to sell a manuscript. And so you call it things in pursuit of God. Well, that sounds better than saying, well, that's about it. You know? I've gone about as far as I'm going, thank you. You know. Very few people are going to buy that unless they're looking for a confessional. And I mean, they can get that in other tabloids, a fresh one every week. But you can read it nonetheless. You can read what I'm talking about, and without any doubt, and I did a little of it for you, and there's no need doing any more particularly, but you can certainly read what appears to be very short, pithy sentences over and over and over of any particular manuscript such as this, of them saying, you know, there is the only potential man has is a knowledge of God. The only possibility he has is God's grace. The only possible way that he can save himself is through the intervention of God. And you can certainly read that at one level and go, it's nothing but children. It's people of very limited perception in life. It's just people that want to whine, or it's people, not picking on them, but you can say that people are not making any effort. They are absolutely stuck somewhere. Their eyes are upon a supernatural, otherworldly dream, which is strictly a dream. It does not exist within this reality. And you can just dismiss it and say, well, they're deluded. They're childlike in their thinking. They're parochial, at least, because they can't get past the point that there is some external force. But if your understanding gets a bit better, you can look right at that and read, not people redundantly for hundreds of pages saying, well, you've got to pray. And you've got to pray, and they keep apparently repeating themselves. They're very common doing that. You've got to pray to God on Monday and say, God, please save me from feelings of greed. And it goes on and on. Then you turn to the next chapter. You've got to pray to God on Tuesday. And you think, boy, are they hard-pressed for material? Or, they don't know what they're doing. They just keep repeating it. But you can read it, and you can find, rather than talking about God and prayers, appeals to some external, extra systemic force, which is a dream, insofar as any reality, not just this one in people's idea of God, but we're living in a 5D reality. And people would have, let's assume, a parallel idea, a similar notion of a God. It would still be illusionary. In other words, living in a 3D reality, you could say, well, if there is a God, he's in a higher reality. It'd have to be in a 5-dimensional. It's the part I left out. I assume you were following me. But if we were in a 5, it'd be the same thing. It is a dream. That is, if you picture, when the mind can picture something that is extra systemic out of their reality, it is not real. It is a dream. It's as real to the mind as anything else. People that say that they believe in God right here on our planet, people are prepared to die rather than say, I don't believe in God. That they say, well, I can feel him. He talks to me. Yeah, it's real. It's as real as anything else to them. But it is a dream in the sense that if you have to picture it as being extra systemic from where you are, from your understanding, it is a dream. That is, you can never realize it. Which is why, and from another view, as I pointed out, that people use the idea of God without knowing it as an anthropomorphizing of a higher state. A higher state of reality, a more enriched state, but personally, a higher degree of understanding. That's all it represents. I say all, to them it's a big deal. But you don't have to look. You don't have to worry about looking up in the skies waiting for God to come. Well, unless you want to. If he does, you sure are going to be surprised. Now, I don't mean that you're going to be surprised that he came. If he comes, you're going to be surprised what he is. I keep wanting to say more, expand on surprise, but I'll let it go. I think surprise, though, will fit. At any rate. You can read such as I was describing and actually find not redundant peons to gods, but you can read it and see it. Of course, you've got to have some understanding of it already. See, that was a gesture for you see. Now, that's not the same as history. That's you see. I think. No, that's I think. You see us. You can read it as being, you can read right into it if you already have some understanding thereof. You can suddenly read that they are giving very specific, very unspiritualistic, very undeistic instructions on how to work on one's own personal consciousness. That it is as specific as telling someone, for instance, those that kinds of methods or approaches that would apparently be very non-clerical in nature, to tell someone that that if you're ever going to even start, even any chance of ever changing your consciousness, your understanding, you have got to bring your attention under control. You've got to focus it. And they say, here's the method. Here's the best method ever found. Is simply count. Put a number on each inhalation and exhalation of your breath. If you lose, start all over. But do it. Just go to yourself, no matter what else you're doing, just go Every time you do that, go 1. When you let it out 2, if you lose your place and you suddenly realize it and you just exhale, you know it's an even number, so next time you go, start with 1. Of course, for some reason, I guess due to my past verbal antics, some of you laugh. That's about as potent a weapon as there is, insofar as just a weapon, just a describable method. So what I'm trying to get you to see is that would apparently be much more, well it is, much more specific, hard-nosed, hands-on than what you would first read or what you could read. This means read. Well, unless you're Jewish and Arabic, and it's this way and then that way. And then if you're Chinese. But anyway, this is read. Instead of reading it as people pleading to some faraway God, some imaginary cosmic force, and whining and crying, please help me, and oh, what will I do, and I need your grace, and come down and give me. Instead of that, you can see right in those same words, very non-otherworldly directions. And I was trying to point out that rather than worry about did they understand, which I went ahead and told you, that anybody that is writing on the basis of God and spiritual basis, of you saying, well, how much more did they understand? Or did they understand more? And the answer is no. And the part that I said I couldn't point out, that I'm back pretending for another reason. I'm trying to get you to see again tonight, but say I'm pretending I'm just getting you up to speed, which is going to work just right, that we'll be up to speed by the time tonight's tapes run out. But the way I presented it was saying it doesn't matter. And many of you went, but if I'd slowed down or given any hint, I bet you some of your own minds by now would have gone, well, you're just going to say it doesn't matter whether they knew it or not. That's not really the point. I didn't spend 30 or 40 minutes of the tape last time just to point that out. It's more than that. Now, I know that some people that would apparently be a step upward in their perceptions. And it would be to most people, that you could see something that by all intents and purposes, when you read it, which is not the only thing, if you read something now, the confessions or the writings of some, let's say, Christian mystic from the 1400s, and it's still being published, it's in widespread distribution, enough that it's been published currently, and you read it, it's not just your perception at the ordinary level, it's not just your perception of it being what it appears to be. There's also a perception now of a countless number of people for 500 years. And that's not really it. But what I want you to understand, it is not just your perception of reading Saint so-and-so or monk so-and-so's writings where he goes on and on and on about God and prayer and etc. And me say that you read it, and at first it strikes you that there is nothing beyond that. I mean, the man was obviously an absolute committed Christian, that he was tied to the idea of God. But then you go along the line I'm saying that sometime later your awareness increases. You go back and read the same kinds of material, perhaps the same exact book, and you read it and go, I absolutely missed it the first time. I mean, he wrote that way, that's what it says, but why didn't I see, instead of God here, if I ignore all that stuff and about prayers and for the cries for external assistance, if I see that it's all directed inside of one man's mind, it's not between him and God, it's not between him and anything else. And it's not between him and being in this secluded room, cut off from the rest of life. It is not him sitting there in silence, and the silence being no more than what it seems to be, that is, that he went off by himself into a room, into a cave, so that he could cut himself off from the sounds of the world. You can forget all of that. It's in one man's mind. He's trying to cut the sounds, and he's trying to cut himself off inside of his mind from certain sounds. Never mind other people. He is trying to secret himself away internally here. In the idea of trying to focus only his love of God, it's not that. He's trying to focus his neural activity in one place, and it doesn't matter where. And now I see it, and they just use the idea of God. And I missed it the first time. No, you didn't. Plus, it wasn't your fault to start with, as I said. You weren't dealing just with your mind perceiving it just as literally as it's written. It was also the weight of 500 years. It's always the weight of life. I'm not trying to infer anything more hocusy-pocusy about history, that just because 500 other people, or 500 years of millions of people that believed it was that, is what made you believe it. That's not untrue, but that is that version of it, that telling of it is far too, way over, unnecessarily complex. Because that's an analyzation. Well, wait a minute, there's something there. I could think on that. I could study on that. That what you're saying is that if a group of people, for a long period of time, if multitudes of people believe a certain thing, then I come along later, and even if I didn't know it, and I read about it, that it will have an effect on me. Yeah. But then people go, screw, You're going to go, wait a minute, I'll analyze that. There's nothing to analyze. Well, not unless you want to stay in life's good graces. For the story, if you like the man who said that he'd come to believe that the life that had been given to him was like a field that he must plow. And life again was pleased to see that it had given of itself to the right kind of guy. In other words, you're run-of-the-mill dunderhead. I'm sorry. You're run-of-the-mill deep thinker. A man of reflection. Man of analyzation. Well, hey, he started off, he didn't just say, hey, life's a bowl of buttermilk. Life's a plate of turnips. Or a vat of beer. No, the man was obviously above your normal cut. Well, I don't know whether he was Jewish or not, but above average, because he didn't say that the life I've been given is like a plate of raviola. He could think already. He saw it metaphorically. He went, well, the life I have been given is like a field that I must plow. And life was pleased, again, to see that it had given of itself to the right kind of guy. Of course, I must apologize for bringing in matters that have nothing to do with what we're talking about. And you would think that once you could read behind these accepted canons, let's say of Orthodox Christianity, just to use that example, and you think, well, it's nothing but about prayer, devotion to God. And it's not. You read it and you think, I missed it. They all missed it. That son of a gun was there hidden out within this, such and such order, some order of monks or nuns, and he's going through all this stuff about God and praying and doing all that, and he fooled them. That son of a gun, somewhere he got tied up with Sufis or Buddhists or mystics somewhere. He was there in their midst, and he knew what he was doing, and he just had to write it this way. And you would think, not without foundation, you would think, I'm getting better. You are, but think, I am getting better because now I realize that some of the things that are apparently written on one level, that are publicly known, widely known, are something else. But see, here's where you also will end up, or where you can stop. It's almost impossible to get out of that because, for one thing, you almost throw your shoulder out of joint, patting yourself on the ass back. So that's one way to know that that test tonight for pregnant and lame stay-at-home mystics, in case you didn't get how to determine the presence of a lack of progress. You still think about it. So that's the same thing as patting yourself on the back. God, I'm getting better. Well, you were up until then. I'm making progress. Well, perhaps you were until then. The train just stopped. Yeah, but I feel better. If you say so. I mean, you know best. You can look. You look down at the writing. Now, remember, that means look at. You look down at the writing, and you think, well, I see behind it. But then was the kinds of questions, and I'm reminding you again, I didn't bring it up because people asked me questions about this. That was not the point. You do it yourself, and you think, well, wait a minute. They knew more than they said. No, they didn't. But then, after having gone through that for the second time, then we can hesitate, or I can change the subject for a few minutes, and go, oh, by the way, the point was, I'm telling you, they did not understand any more than they wrote about. But, here's the point. And then some of you are already primed for it, like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but if you leave it there, the train stopped again. It's correct, it doesn't matter. What the hell difference does it make? Except you think it made a difference. Except you think that metaphorical writings, metaphorical speech, is reflective of somebody's deep analyzation, some prior understanding that somebody had. Life would be proud of you. Life does not need metaphorical speech. Only man does. Life speaks literally. But via thought, men hear figuratively. But then the few, the proud, the few, that is, would-be mystics, they push figurative past that point. They began not to just, see, we've already got the situation set up where you're born, you're human. You're part of the mass of humanity. You're born in the garden like everybody else. You're born there, and via thought, regardless of the fact that life speaks literally. That's the opening salvo. That's the opening statement of that news item. Life speaks literally. Period. Next sentence. Men, via thought, hear it figuratively. Semicolon at least. Then a few, the would-be mystics, they go a little past that. They began to push figurative hearing. That is, their interpretation that they take as being scientific, hard-nosed, looking right at it, rational. But it's figurative. That's all they're dealing with. But those would-be mystics, those with the itch to live and understand that's extraordinary, they push this figurative hearing past that point, and rather than hearing life speak figuratively, which everybody does, you got to start there, they begin to push that past just figuratively, or toward figurative speech, communication. They push it further, which seems to be an enriching of it, which seems to be an improvement, which I grant you is not necessarily not. But they push then the figurative speech into more specifics, into it being metaphorical. That is, that it's not just random, that this figurative way in which man's mind, via thought, hears life speak, is then they take it metaphorically. They extend it to where now, apparently, you can narrow it down and begin to pick out specifics of what life is actually saying. But therein does life again have your perceptions by the short hairs. Because you think you're attacking the fence of captivity at certain places. But that fence, friends and neighbors, has the inherent ability to flex, to accommodate itself. That no matter what you do to the mind, if you're rational, if you're part of the ordinary, no matter what you do to that fence, that is to the fence, it will accommodate you. The idea of there being, to ordinary minds, an enemy, an opposition. Of course, the religious always think of it as being evil personified, as Satan, Lucifer. But that there is actually an opposition that will fight you. That in fact man has been described by some, opined as being a great battlefield upon which the forces of good and evil fight out their war. And that we're just merely here and it's raging through us. These great external forces of good and evil. That's a lot better than that. It's a lot simpler than that. Because if you actually had an external enemy, if the fence had the kind of powerful wherewithal that men's minds normally ascribe to the opposition, the forces of evil, that is, Satan, is described in all its many forms in all of the world's major religions and people's mind. The idea of evil is always personified into a quite formidable foe. You don't laugh around it, play around with Satan and Lucifer, or whoever it is, the forces of evil, because they damn near, take the Western version, there was a revolt, they damn near, enough to be reported, revolted against God himself. Is how Lucifer ended up. You know, he was a loser. And when you're a loser, you always end up kind of with, well, you know what happened. So that was how Lucifer came about. They revolted against God at one time. So the point is, he was not a potential foe of no consequence. So you look upon the forces of evil as being something not to be trifled with. They're strong. You try to go up against them. It's like people, ordinary people, thinking about their bad habits, like drinking, as being, you know, such a horrible habit. And when they try to personify it as being that it's, you know, not a weakness on my part, it's not actually sin, it's a manifestation. It just shows the power of darkness, of evil, of sin itself, but the power, and I'm weak, that it's strong. It's a lot better than that. If that were true, you might get somewhere. Well, let's say you got a 50-50 chance. It's like running your head against a stone wall. You can say, well, there's no chance it's going to give. Yeah, there could be. You know this, a stone wall can break down. We know that. And you can say, well, my head won't do it. There's always a chance. Yeah. But here's what there is no chance. Forget this idea of there being this formidable, strong, unyielding, or at least damn near unyielding foe, evil. There's always a chance that a large tree can be broken, that a stone wall can be knocked down. But when that wall is made out of elastic, when that great tree, when that great foe can accommodate itself to any and all assaults, and it just... It is like you decide you'll jump out and you will fight the evil, you will fight the blindness, you will fight the stupidity in yourself even that keeps you from greater understanding. It's like you leap out at it to attack the son of a bitch. And the first thing, but before you know it, what it's done, it's got you in its arm doing a slow dance, and whispering in your ear and saying, do you come here often? And you've been seduced. You try to attack it, and it just like Plastic Man or something, it just gills, and you leaped at it to kill it, and suddenly you're almost in a sensual dance. You think, well, Jesus, I'm about to, end up screwing this mother, or it's about to do me, and you forget all about it. That. Well, we're out of tape. So I see it next time I got us up to speed, and I'll go back to the thing about is all talk metaphor, and why there's a place beyond you even getting to where I can say the people who wrote that, don't worry about whether they understood it or not, because I tell you they didn't. And then you can go, I know what you're going to say next. Then you're going to say it doesn't matter. I've already said that. There's something past that. Of course, if I keep running out of tape, I never have to actually come up with what it is. Just in case I don't know, say I'm safe. That means safe. Oh, no, that means safe. Nah, that's not true.